Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings you live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part? There's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Damp Valley, coming at you once more without my fantabulous co-host, Adam Frommel. I am, however, pleased to keep our season look-ahead train rolling. We're going to move on to the Charlotte Hornets today. I speak with Kanata Edwards. He is the co-host of the Locked On Hornets podcast. It's a great podcast. He co-hosts it with Walker Mel. Follow Kanata on Twitter at Nata the Scribe. That's at NATATHESCRIBE. We get into a lot of things Hornets. They're a fascinating team. We talk LaMelo, potential trades, all that good shit. Before we get started, just my usual reminder to please continue rating, reviewing, and subscribing to us wherever you get your podcasts. Whether you use iTunes or not, though, we do ask that you head over there, search Hardwood Knocks, throw us that 5-star rating, write a review. It takes 10 seconds, and it helps us out so much. Cannot stress that enough. If this is your first time listening to us, consider making this a permanent subscription. Throw us in your rotation staple. We are a league-wide podcast. We try and dive deep into every team when we can. As you will see, we're about to have a 60-plus minute conversation about the Charlotte Hornets. So follow us on Twitter as well, at Hardwood Knocks. We are also on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, search Hardwood Knocks. We'll come up, subscribe, and just want to reiterate, subscribe to this podcast in general. Download every episode. Helps us out a ton. Please and thank you. Without further delay, though, let's get into our Charlotte Hornets look ahead for the 2021-2022 NBA season and beyond, kind of talking a lot of big picture stuff with Locked On Hornets co-host Kanata Edwards. Kanata, thank you so much for coming back to the Hardwood Knocks podcast to talk Charlotte Hornets with me, where I can say now and forever, I'm never going to troll you again, because the past 2 years it's come back to bite me in the ass on draft night. So I just want to get that out of the way now. There will be no trolling here, and not just during this podcast, but ever again. I am terrified. Most importantly, though, how are you doing?
Wait. Hold on. Dan, what are you doing here? I thought this was like the Grant Riller, apologist group. I was told that this was the Grant Riller apologist group. Like, it's me, it's Nikias, and it's Adam. That's it. Like that was it. What are you doing here? So basically, you tricked me into doing this podcast after trolling me. And yes, I did get the last laugh, because now it's been, again, the Obi Toppin. And then you gave up Kai Jones for free, which thank you for that. Thank you. Because those picks are never gonna transfer. But yes, it has been good. It has been good. Trying to enjoy what's left of this off season, because we're rapidly coming up. Media day will be Monday, and it's gonna be crazy, because there's a legitimate superstar in Charlotte for once.
Yes, I mean, LaMelo Ball, and we'll obviously get to him, is fascinating. But look, imagine your disappointment thinking that you're going to be on a podcast with Adam Frommel and Nikias Duncan, and then it's just Dampa Valley. That's got to be like, I'm sorry to ruin your weekend, except I'm not sorry.
It's not. You're not ruining my weekend. I thought we would just get to sob over Grant Riller being in Philly, because I thought Grant Riller was going to do something last year, and then the pandemic kind of ruined it for him. And then he got hurt, and then he's in Philly now. Then the Hornets put him at point guard for no reason whatsoever. And they put him in the worst possible position, and then they ship him and then he goes to Philly. I could legitimately spend a half hour talking about the disappointment that was Grant Riller. We're not going to do that, but I could.
I will say, what was the like? Why isn't he still there? It's not like they have, they do have players at his position, but it's not like he wouldn't have if he was healthy and actually showed like he has zero path to playing time or isn't worth at least still taking a flyer on. That seems bizarre to me.
I would tell you that the Grant Riller experience was made kind of expeditious. Like he was expendable because he's kind of redundant. When you think about it, he's not a point guard. And with the departure of Devontae Graham, their point guard is going to be necessary. Enter Ish Smith. But you ended up with James Bouknight, and then on top of that, you have Kelly Oubre. Plus, they got rid of one of the Martin twins. So
Yes.
Grant Riller had such an uphill climb. I think it was kind of done to him as a favor. And on top of that, this team might give I'm not saying a two-way spot, but LiAngelo Ball might take a roster spot. And unfortunately, if you went just by Summer League only, which granted is a very dangerous proposition, you're talking about LiAngelo Ball looking loads, and I mean loads better than Grant Riller in Summer League, no matter how you slice it. And
Wow.
unfortunately, that's also the thing. Like, I want to say I believe in Grant Riller. I think he's going to do well in Philly, but at the same time, I'm like when LiAngelo Ball looks like more of an NBA player than you do, there's a problem, and it just means he's not a fit on this roster.
Somewhere, Adam, my co-host ears are bleeding right now.
I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't want to be the one to be the bad. Like I said, I thought this was I honestly thought that this was going to be one of those where it was just, again, I could cry about the disappointment because I was so happy that Grant Riller was on this team. And then he did that, which was nothing.
Looking at the actual people that are still on the Hornets, then wanted to pick your brain about some of their offseason stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think they made the right call not taking a more expensive swing at center? And maybe I should rephrase it as I'm fine with that concept because it was Jared Allen or Rashawn Holmes? And I mean, I did say on this podcast, if it only cost a little bit more than what he got to get out of Sacramento, Charlotte should be fined a draft pick for letting Rashawn Holmes return to Sacramento is more of a joke. But I'm actually overall fine with the concept. But I guess the rephrase the question would be, should they have gone with a cheaper defensive swing at the center position than a Mason Plumlee?
I struggle with this question because I honestly do struggle with this question because there's a part of me that absolutely agrees with you. There's also the part that you could make a case the biggest, like we could go back to when the Hornets were as high as fourth. And granted, no matter how you see that, if you saw that as a pandemic mirage, this team was as high as fourth in the East and then fell apart when Gordon Hayward wasn't able to continue the season. That was a giant hole that they were never going to be able to fill.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue with worse centers on the roster last year that filling the hole that was left by Gordon Hayward's absence with a guy similar, with a guy that can do something similar in Kelly Oubre was more important than filling the center position, and then more than getting another center. I love Rashawn Holmes. I'm not sure I'm paying him 14, 15 million a year, especially.
Hey, it turns out you didn't have to, apparently.
apparently, and I think Mitch Kupchak alluded to that. Like they didn't think that he was going to be available for the 14 fit, like the 14, 15 that maybe it might have taken. I get it, but I also understand that they believe in internal development. I think that's one thing that the Hornets have kind of proven, like, we're going to trust our own guys. We're going to trust the system. It's worked thus far with Miles Bridges. Devontae Graham being what he was, even though he kind of leveled off last year. Like, I think this team trusts, okay, we're just going to have to, we're going to be the type to go to the farmer's market. We're going to go get some raw materials. We're going to trust ourselves to chef it up and make ourselves a decent basketball team. And I get that because I like Kai Jones. Granted, I think he's a year away, but I also think that they like Kai Jones. I think they like JT Thor more than we think. I think this team wants to invest in younger guys because they feel like they know that Miles Bridges is going to be super expensive coming up. They're still going to have to make a decision on PJ Washington at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I get wanting to stay cap flexible and not blowing the budget on the center when they don't necessarily have to right now.
And I get that part of it. I'm just wondering, like, should they have been looking at a Nerlens Noel or a Khem Birch or just somebody who would give you more defensively than a Mason Plumlee? Because I feel like what he does best, I'm just not sure that the Hornets need even on offense. And so,
oh no, I disagree there. I disagree on offense. What they because a lot of the time when the ball got to the center position, and granted it's Cody Zeller and Bismack Biyombo, so your expectation should have been lowered off the gate. What I would tell you is that at some point you were going to need a guy that was going to help facilitate and move the ball. That was one of the good things that PJ Washington did from the center position. So if they're going to lean in on a position, leaning in on offense and understanding that, the defense is not going to be there this year, and understanding that and being comfortable with that for one more year, I completely understand. And more importantly, we're talking about a guy in Mason Plumlee that if you pair with the non-guaranteed contract of a Kelly Oubre in that second year, you may be able to get you somebody similar like a Miles Turner. Like you're going to be able to do something with those two contracts at the end of the day. And I understand exactly why they went for that. I understand why they didn't do it this year, because I think they feel like we need to really have a 82 game test and figure out what this roster really is outside of the certain pieces that we have absolutely locked down. I understand why they're doing it. I just hope that if they don't necessarily get to the point where we think they will, that people are understanding of why they did it.
Yeah, and so, like I said, I'll have to watch more closely then to see how Mason Plumlee does with them. I probably just, I guess I didn't look at that closely enough, but I think I just would have liked to have seen them go more defensive-minded, even if they weren't going to spend, which is, I do agree with you on that concept of it. And even to take the flyer on Kelly Oubre, it deepens your roster. Like you use that money, let's just say, on two players instead of one, and at a time when bigs are, I don't want to say inherently less impactful, but like they're just not, unless you're apparently Jared Allen getting $100 million over 5 years, you're just not, they're getting squeezed. I think Rashawn Holmes is a perfect example where how did he only stay on early bird rights? You already kind of answered this though. You don't expect Kai Jones to really get any crack at playing time in year one?
I think there is.
Also, I'm staring at the protections on the pick that they sent to the Knicks and I could cry. I'm just normally, I understand that like that wasn't the Knicks guy, but my criticism for them in the draft, I think they had a good overall season, was take a bigger swing than you did in the draft. And normally when you are giving up your first, the other team is, I don't always want to say overpaying, but there's a pick that's probably going to convey in the next 2 years. And I don't think you look at these protections and think that this pick has like the best chance of conveying before 2024.
Exactly. And you're talking about year 4 LaMelo at that point. And if I'm not mistaken, doesn't it go to second rounders at that point?
I think so I have written down, and maybe I'm wrong, I have lotto protection in 2024 and 2025.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So,
I don't know if you've noticed this. This is just a random note. It feels like the protections on picks are just extending out longer and longer in these trades.
Absolutely. Like the thing is, and it's funny that you talk about this because this is the issue I have when they traded Devontae Graham and only got the first round pick that's eventually going to turn into 2 seconds. Like, I understand that, like, the asset sometimes is very, very, like, the player is much more worth than the picks that you're going to get. Kai Jones, and to answer your question a little bit, I think Kai Jones has a strength issue a little bit. I think Kai Jones also, like, there's a lot of this, he's still got to figure out how to play. And if he does that, and honestly, if he cracks the rotation, it's because he can protect the rim, he can functionally rebound, and he can play decent pick and roll defense as the 5. If he does all of that, sky's the limit. If he can't, he's going to be in Greensboro. And I think that that's going to be okay. I think a lot of what we saw in Summer League needs to be ironed out. He was trying to take dudes one-on-one. Now, granted, there was some explosive plays that he made in Summer League, and it's stuff that you really, 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 really want to take note of. At the same time, that kid needs to learn like the game and learn where he needs to be as a 5. And if he figures that out, like I wouldn't the earliest estimation for me would be if he shows up in, let's say, January. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised, but that's the earliest I think he shows up. I also do think that this also depends on what happens with a Vernon Carey. I'm not counting Nick Richards. I don't think Nick Richards will be on this roster come like the start of the season. But if we're talking about like if Vernon Carey somehow becomes a body on defense and becomes functional on defense, that changes what the Kai Jones trajectory. I think this is going to be one of those things where he's going to show up. It's just a matter of when, because that athleticism, you can't keep off the floor for very long.
I fell in love with him during Summer League. He threw this pass that I can't remember right now, but it was just so emphatic and flamboyant. It was like he wanted you to know that he was passing, like Melo when he's cussing on rebounds. I loved it. I also just really want to see what LaMelo looks like, or see LaMelo play with someone who has pogo stick hops, wants to crush it on the finish, views offensive rebounds as one of his most important food groups. So I'm kind of hoping he does get in just some type of run this year, because I would just love.
Hold on, Miles Bridges wasn't enough.
What's that?
Miles Bridges wasn't enough.
I don't consider Miles Bridges a big. If you want to throw Miles Bridges at the 5 more often, then
no. We can't do that. We can't do that.
But that does lead me to this question. So it sounds like we can expect PJ Washington to, have a timeshare at center and power forward again, if not spend even more time at the 5 this year.
Yeah. I would say that's the plan right now, and that's because honestly, the best lineups last year had PJ Washington at the 5. That's like they're gonna have to really, 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 really lean into that. And there's a part of me that understands it. There's a part of me that wants them. It's one of those things like I would only use that to close games. I would never feature him, or I would never basically slot him in to be the 5 for anything other than it's winning time, because I think it just wears him out. I do think that and it's one of those things like the physicality of the 5 in the NBA is one of those things that we do not talk about nearly enough, and how much it wears you down and grinds you down. And in a compacted season, that's the type of stuff that'll get someone hurt. And I'm not the biggest fan of seeing one of the more impactful bigs that they have being put in a position to consistently be worn down. Mm-hmm. And at some point, like we're going to have these conversations of who do they keep, Miles Bridges or PJ Washington? And the tempting pick is Miles Bridges. I'm not sure versatility wise that they can do without PJ Washington at all.
Not right now if they want to play the 5 so much. And you mentioned it takes a toll. I was surprised at how good the rebounding was. Obviously an issue when he played the 5. Mm-hmm. I was actually surprised at how well the defense held up overall through like huge chunks of the seasons. And I was looking through the lineup data. Charlotte's defense was in the 69th percentile of efficiency when he played the 5, which was for almost cleaning the glass has at like 1,800 possessions, that's a lot for someone his size. Do you view him as someone though that's going to be able to like, I guess you kind of already mentioned, but like hold up or be more of a back line? Like he seems like a better switch defender right now than he ever would be a rim protector or just a back line.
He's actually underrated on that. He's actually underrated. I do believe that he can do that. Whether you want him to do that is the question. He can do it. I'm just not sure that it actually helps you. Like the switchable 5, love what he does, and he helps basically stop a lot of these drives, because unfortunately LaMelo's probably their second or third best perimeter defender, and I don't think he's all that good. Mm-hmm. So they give up a lot of drives, and PJ's had to clean up a lot of stuff in that back line. The problem becomes, like you noted, the rebounding. because I just remember, and I think you probably watched the game that either the second last game or the last game of the season against the Knicks in the third and fourth quarters, where PJ Washington was the center, and they just kept giving up offensive rebound after offensive rebound after offensive rebound. It's not one of those things that's sustainable when you get closer to the end of the season. So that's why I think it works. He can do that. The problem becomes what happens when you overuse it and you're back into March, April, and hopefully maybe a little bit of May. What happens then with that team, with that lineup?
The thing I've given some consideration to is if having Kelly Oubre Jr. helps in that regard, because all of a sudden you can play him, Bridges, and Washington if you really wanted to at the same time. And Kelly Oubre Jr. has shown he's not. I think Kelly Oubre Jr.'s defense has been probably like the idea of Kelly Oubre Jr. is fantastic. It's better than actual Kelly Oubre Jr., but he can kind of guard up a little bit. And so I'm wondering if they can just mix and match more in those lineups, and that Kelly Oubre Jr. might help them most there. Curious what you think about that, but overall, I'm just curious as to what you think about Kelly Oubre's overall fit on this team, which that seemed, I'm shocked a lot in free agency, not being an insider, but that was like maybe one of the most random signings that I saw and like never would have expected, but it seems like it makes sense.
It makes sense because Mitch basically was like, and I think the thing that shocks me the most about Kelly Oubre Jr. isn't necessarily the fact that they signed him, it's what they signed him for. Because it's the 12 and then that second year is partially guaranteed. That's the part that surprises me. And I think, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Like, I think he was signed primarily because the wing spot was such a big hole when Gordon Hayward went down. And you can only rely, and we'll talk, I know we're going to talk about this more, but I think you can only rely on Gordon Hayward so much. Gordon Hayward was their best player last year, despite what anyone will tell you about LaMelo. I love LaMelo. Gordon Hayward was their best player last year. The minute he went down, that was it. And that was it for possibly getting just a out and out playoff spot the minute he went down. I think that's Gordon Hayward insurance. And I think Gordon Hayward insurance is very, very necessary considering some of the road trips that this team will take this year. Specifically the pre-Christmas one in December, which if you look at is fairly brutal. You're going to need that because they're going to have to load manage him. So I look at Kelly Oubre Jr. as more of Gordon Hayward insurance. We just need a functional body that isn't necessarily Jalen McDaniels or Cody Martin or maybe even James Bouknight, even though I don't think he's ready yet. I do think that Kelly Oubre, the idea of Kelly Oubre, especially when we're not asking him to do much, all you got to do, come in, come off the bench, get your shots up, defend a little bit, and be that insurance. I think doing that with as little expectation and basically being a part of a team that is going to be up and down again this year because the Hornets believe in that brand, I do think that the idea of that is going to, I think the idea of Kelly Oubre is actually going to match the expectation here for Kelly Oubre, and I think it'll be a nice little marriage right there.
He probably just benefits from getting out of Golden State where they were asking him, at least at the beginning of the year, make too many read and react decisions, and that's just never been the type of player he is. So I'm fascinated to see how he fits in with this team. Miles Bridges, let's just keep talking about these, bigger wings or whatever you consider him. And if you're wondering whether Miles Bridges searches his name on Twitter, the answer is yes, because he retweeted something I tweeted about him while I was doing research for this pod, and I found that hysterical. But he was so good last year. He was. And he just, to me, and you've seen way more of him, so he might have shown this in the past, but he showed more directional variance on the ball. He hit step back threes. Do you buy in to his quotes breakout last year? And what's the next frontier look like for him if he gets there?
The next frontier, I'll give you a real quick answer on the next frontier. The next frontier is consistency. That's literally it. The breakout isn't a surprise to me, and the only reason I'm not surprised is because he put this together. He kind of put this closer to the end of last year. He put this together last year, and then the pandemic happened and everything else like that, and it's the same reason why I think PJ Washington's in for a big year this year. I do think it's very sustainable what he did. I think it's incredibly sustainable because he was doing a lot of this in the second year. And I also do believe that he is capable of doing a lot of this stuff from just, there's a lot of this that just he'd been working on putting it together. And there's something that, if you've ever heard our podcast before, it's been one of those like running jokes. The Hornets give their second year players more than they can handle and then realize they can't handle certain aspects and then start adapting and adjusting from there. We've seen it done with Miles Bridges in year 2. They realize it's too much, and then in year 3, they let him figure it out off the bench and let him learn and adapt and go from there. We've seen it now with PJ Washington, where they've done the same thing. So I think a lot of the stuff that you've seen is stuff that he's kind of figured out and realized, oh, I can do this at the next level. Oh, I can do this also at the next level.
Slow is just right if you're on vacation, a sloth, or describing QuickBooks. More like slow books. It sucks you in and slows you down with manual processes, integration difficulties, and glitchy delays that leave you scrambling for the numbers you need. Now is the time to make the switch to NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 financial system, because NetSuite gives you visibility and control of your financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. It's everything you need to grow, all in one place. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time, no matter how big your business grows. Failing to switch to NetSuite will leave you stuck trying to make sense of your books while your competitors sprint ahead. 93% of surveyed businesses increased visibility and control since switching to NetSuite. And right now, special financing is back. NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind financial program only for those ready to switch today. Head to netsuite.com/bluewire right now. Get special financing at netsuite.com/bluewire. One more time, netsuite.com/bluewire.
Hey guys, looking for a betting advantage this football season? You need to download BetQL, the only app you'll need to compare betting odds and make smart bets. Their best bet computer model scans over 350,000 unique bets per year to give you a best bet recommendation for every game across all major sports and gives you the reasoning behind why you should place the bet. Their model covers everything from spreads, over-unders, and player prop bets. Don't want to use this model and prefer to do the research yourself? Well, BetQL has all the necessary tools for your betting research needs. Tools like line movement and sharp data on who the pros are backing, team summaries highlighting previous success against the spread and over-under, team lineup breaking news and injury status updates, and leaderboards to track how you stack up against others and to view your winning streaks. Better data, better bets. Head to the App Store or Google Play Store now to download BetQL. You can also head to try.betql.co/bluewire to get started now. Enter the discount code BLUEWIRE at payment checkout for 25% off any of their subscription offerings. Make sure to check out their offers page to find a special offer to receive a full free year of BetQL. Don't miss out on the chance to gain your betting advantage during this football season.
I'm just so fascinated to see what his next contract looks like, and he is so good. And he talked about, I think at the end of the season, that he was going to try and focus on creating for himself more consistently. And the thing I alluded to before I asked you this question was he shot 58+% on step back threes last year, 17 of 29, I think it was. And they weren't like Luka Doncic, James Harden step back threes, but they were step threes. Hello?
Yes, yeah, I'm here. Sorry, you cut out for a second.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so just he was great, and like going back and watching that, I'm so curious to see like what could happen for him this year. Should he throw it all together? And what do you see? What do you see for him in like that sort of next contract? Like you mentioned, it's going to be expensive to keep him. Like if you had to even peg or ballpark a number, what do you think that's going to take to retain him?
Like 72 for 4 feels like the number.
Okay.
Like 18 a year. I feel like because one, we're dealing with a clutch sports client, and they come very, very expensive most of the time. I feel like it's a 72 for like 4. Like, I feel like that's the number. I don't. It's not one of those that I'm. But I just don't think there's a lot of this that if you believe in Miles Bridges, and I think around the Terry contract is where you go. And I think it's 18 for 7. I don't think they're doing a 5-year deal with him. I do not think they're doing a 5-year deal, especially when like they don't have LaMelo locked down. I do think that a lot of this is also dependent on because you're talking about he may be the number one free agent if he has a big year next year because of
Right.
because of the wasteland that is next year's free agency. like that's the thing. He has another. He may be the number one free agent next year. So like 18 for 72, like 72 for 4 just feels like the number in the sweet spot. I just wonder if they do it now and get it over with, or if they've basically decided, we're going to play it out and we'll just match anything, which I think is a very, 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 very dangerous proposition.
I would agree with you because you look at the cap space landscape next summer, and maybe it won't be too bad, but as you mentioned, there's a real path to, Zach LaVine's going to hit the open market at this point, we know, but after him, and we don't really know what's going to happen with Bradley Beal and his player option. Will he extend? Like, is he going to be traded somewhere where he'll stay? If 4 and 72 is what it takes to get it done now, unless you think that you're trying to use him to acquire a better player and it gets so hard to trade guys who are on extensions, I am locking him down at 4 and 72 right freaking now.
Yeah, I would. I just don't know if they will. Like, they've got, like, I thought that, because again, we talked about this last year. I thought they were locking down Devontae Graham. They tended not to be in love with him as much as in love with him as they thought. Plus, and this is the other thing about Devontae Graham. Devontae Graham wanted more of a role than was going to be available to him after the emergence of LaMelo Ball. I do think a lot of this depends on how much they really want him to stay. I think they want him to stay. I wonder how much Clutch is waiting for him to play the open market to get as much money as he can, because I think they know the Hornets will probably match. And we also know Clutch really doesn't do the October deals, like, again, the Halloween extensions, as much as they probably want to. So I'm not sure. I would do it though.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is it also wouldn't surprise me that if he hits the open market, that they're trying to look for like a 3-year deal plus the player option at the end to give him more flexibility, because with their, I think they've had some like rookie extensions where they've gone the full 5 years if the guy's a superstar, but they're like non-superstar clients. Even some of their superstar clients have just favored these shorter deals that get them back into free agency sooner.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, I actually, now that you say that makes a lot of sense, because again, the 3-year deal plus the option gives him an out just in case LaMelo wants to leave, which I'm not the one that's going to start inciting that panic, because Lord knows that New Orleans, again, if you just take a look at New Orleans and the stuff that's going down there, like but I understand, like, if everybody wants a parachute out of this franchise sometimes, because you never know, because it's a small market. And this is part of the problem of dealing with a small market at times, is if your star can choose to leave at any time, and that's just the way it is.
So Terry Rozier, this ties into the Devontae Graham stuff. I listened to the pod that you and Walker did in the reaction to the Rozier extension, and you both were kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. It was a really good podcast. Everyone should check it out. Can you sort of expound upon your thoughts about why you're okay with the price point relative to the responsibility that he has? And I'm wondering if part of this calculus was because Devontae Graham was gone, and now they look at Terry Rozier as even more important, because yes, you have Ish Smith, but Ish Smith is Ish Smith at the end of the day there. And also, I know Terry Rozier slipped off with his efficiency towards the end of last year, and I think that probably had a lot to do with, you had Gordon Hayward banged up, LaMelo banged up. Statistically speaking, he was also one of the most accurate crunch time shooters in the league. And I know he's not taking these difficult off the dribble attempts, but just to have a guy who can stretch the floor like that and knock down those big shots, I understood both sides of the argument. I'm just not sure where I still land on it, because that number is is huge. And so
It
I'm just
is.
curious whether you could expound upon your thoughts for our listeners on it.
Honestly, I was one of those that understood it because this team was searching for the next Marvin Williams. And what I mean by that is Marvin Williams came in, taught the rookies how to work, taught Miles how to work, taught Dwayne Bacon, now a Knick, how to work. He taught PJ Washington how to work. There's a lot of these guys that came in with the work ethic that they did because there was a tone setter. So Terry Rozier is a tone setter. On top of that, he was, as you said, one of the best clutch shooters in the league last year, and even more so, had a career year with the guy you just drafted. And it wasn't one of those things like, oh, it may be a pandemic incited clutch shooting performance. No, this felt sustainable. This felt like, and even if you're not going to get the highs that he hit, going back, regressing to the mean with LaMelo Ball, feeding you easy passes and easy shots feels easily replicable. And if he's going to give you those kind of numbers, I would say he's worth the McCollum money that he's getting right now. And if that's going to be the case, on top of the TV money that is coming, and the cap is going to go back up, I think this is one of those deals that ends up looking better than it is a couple of years down the line. I really do believe that at some point you do have to start committing to guys. And as we said, Devontae Graham thing could not happen because Devontae Graham wanted to be the starting point guard. Turns out there was somebody better. On top of that, you are also getting a whole bunch of, like, the Miles thing has to play into it. And at some point you have to develop your own guys, because for a long time they weren't paying their own guys. They needed to pay one of them to say, hey, if you do X, we will invest in you so much. So I get it, but it's one of those things, like, I can honestly see the other side, but I also believe strongly that the people business part of this is why you sign a guy like Terry Rozier, because you want him to be the shining example of, see, we'll pay you if you do this, and we believe in you. And on top of that, Terry just loves this place, man. Terry's everywhere in Charlotte. Terry loves Charlotte. Terry chose Charlotte. I think that matters at the end of the day, because, again, this is a people business.
The other thing with him too is this isn't a staple part of his game, but he gives you, a lot of people view him as just a catch and shoot guy, and I think he's more than that. He actually hit a higher. He had posted a higher effective field goal percentage on his pull-up jumpers than Devin Booker last year. That's not to say that I think he's better than Devin Booker. I just think there's a little bit more to his game. And then also, I often forget he's 6'1" when I watch him play defense certain times. And so maybe you're more comfortable giving him that money. And it's sort of the perfect age to do it. He's entering his age 27 season, so this takes him straight through his early 30s. And so that ends up being fine. As you mentioned, the cap spike, whether it's smoothed out or whether it's this huge jump, that deal in year 4, when it's 26 point whatever $million, it doesn't look, I don't even want to say as bad, because I'm fine with players getting paid. And if Terry Rozier from last year, if that's just the new stasis for him, he is absolutely 100% worth this deal. I guess I'm just not sure yet whether that's the Terry Rozier to expect for even, 2 to 3 years of this contract. But I'm open to the idea that it could be, which is why I didn't know what to think of it. And listening to that podcast between you and Walker was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. Like, the thing is, and I understood, I also think that they needed to have some sort of certainty, because I do believe that if they came out to a slow start, and looking at that schedule, slow start is very, 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 very possible. You would hear all the whispers of Terry Rozier, Terry Rozier being on the trade block. And also, we talk about the wasteland that is next offseason.
Yeah.
Like, if Terry Rozier puts up anything similar to what he did last year, what's his number compared to what it is now? Think about it that way.
I'd probably argue they gave him the deal he would have gotten if maybe he got like 4-100 or something. But
I think he would have gotten more. Like, honestly, Dan, I think he left a good little bit of money on the table. And that's the other thing. Like, the longer I think about this, the more people that sign to, again, before next offseason, I really, 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 really do think that this was going to be one of those scenarios where Terry Rozier would have been right behind Zach LaVine as number 2 free agent because of the catch and shoot, and because we all know NBA front offices are enamored with shooting, and you can never have enough. He would have gotten more. I think he would have gotten 4 for 120. I really do.
Okay, wow. Look, if that's what you think, then they absolutely needed to make that deal. And I lean towards being indifferent with it, which I think that's just probably a borderline compliment then to what he did. But he was so good. I don't think people realize how good he was last season. I have not asked you about James Bouknight yet. What did you think about that pick? Because I fell in love with him at points, and I'm trying not to read too much into Summer League, but in defense of myself, the game in which I fell in love with him was when Davion Mitchell was basically swallowing his soul. So I feel like that sort of balances it out. But I loved it, and I'm just curious as to what your early impressions of him has been. What did you think about that pick, the whole 9 there?
I was surprised he fell. I still am legitimately surprised the Hornets came away with the draft class that they did this year, because I think getting JT Thor, getting Kai Jones, and getting Bouknight is a coup. I do think that, like, people are going to be surprised when Cody Martin plays over him to start the season. I don't expect it to last because one thing about James Borrego is this: he sticks with his guys until he gives them a reason. He sticks with the guys until those guys give him a reason not to play them as much anymore. We've seen it now with the Terry Rozier at point guard experiment. That didn't last because of the explosion of Devontae Graham. That was a slow burn to earning that starting point guard position for Devontae Graham. We saw it last year with LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball was clearly a starter, even though I was kind of defending it at the same time. But we've seen this happen. James Bouknight, it's going to take a while for him to crack real rotation minutes because of Borrego's love of the veterans and love of the system. And the system has kind of worked at this point. So if that's going to be the case, Bouknight's going to play. It's just not going to be when everybody thinks it is. He's not, like, I love James Bouknight. There's an outside shot. He's not going to be in the rookie all-star showcase, the rookie sophomore showcase, because he's not going to have the numbers. I understand why that's going to be the case. He's going to be good. I am not worried about him. I am very, very stoked. The playmaking ability is what really makes me fall in love with him. That's the thing. Not his scoring, because I think the scoring is always going to be there. But his ability to just play make and distribute the basketball was something that we did not see at UConn. I did not think his defense was going to be as good as it was, even on summer league level. He defends competently at an NBA level, and the sooner he does that, I promise you, the faster he's going to play. It's going to come down to his defense because they're going to have more than enough guys that can score. If he can defend and he can shoot, the sky's the limit for this kid. And that may be the one caveat to the why did you sign Terry Rozier to all that money? Because you have a guy that can possibly be better. I would call him this year's Tyrese Halliburton. And I know that's a painful I know that's a painful fact for you.
I hate this. Moving on.
But I think that he can do a lot of things. I think he can do a lot of things well. It's just, when does he explode onto the scene? If he does, if he takes over for Cody Martin early, sky's the limit for him this year.
And it's interesting that you mentioned about how Charlotte likes to throw a lot more on their year 2 players than they can handle, because it does seem like, at least in recent years, they've just groomed or brought their rookies along very slowly. And even LaMelo, I know he was LaMelo last year, but he was coming off the bench for part of the season. And so you mentioned that maybe mid-season he's able to get a regular spot in the rotation, but do you think there's actually a chance where they sort of follow the route of the other non-LaMelo rookies where he's brought along on the slower end?
Oh, I think they're absolutely bringing them along on the slower end. Okay. I do think that. I just think that at some point, like, the gifts that we saw, and granted, it's summer league, so we have to put a cap on it. But at the same time, what you saw is something that the Hornets haven't had in the 2 guard size, in terms of size, distribution, and not even the shooting, but the size, distribution, and athleticism. Like, I kind of really like this kid. I think it's just a matter of time. I'm not saying he's not the Kai Jones thing where I don't think he's going to be a factor until probably January. I think Bouknight gets in early because I think he's that gifted at what he can do. It's just a matter of time.
And I know you said, I don't mean to be all points per game Twitter right now,
Yeah.
but I know you said the scoring doesn't matter as much. I love guys that can seemingly toggle between working on and off the ball. And I think Summer League was telltale of that, where there's he hit some jumpers that left me slack-jawed. And I don't know that the Hornets have, aside from LaMelo, and maybe even not LaMelo, like the level of jumpers or shots that he could create for himself is just, I would argue this team long-term could still use that, but to also know that he can just play off of everybody else, maybe that gives him a pathway to not only making an impact as a rookie, but having some staying power in the rotation. That was one of the other parts of his game that I fell in love with during Summer League.
Yeah, no, that was like the staying power, the jumper, the ability to make jumpers. Because you got to remember, after I would say after game one, because you watched it with me, you watched a whole bunch of this stuff. After game one, he became the number one guy to take care of on offense. Like, that was obvious. They were like, and that was the Davion Mitchell game where Davion was told, "Yo, look, we're taking him out and we're winning this game."
Right.
Like, this kid did a lot, and especially, and the game I honestly fell in love with him was the day I fell in love with was his first game, because he was going up against that Portland team that basically was the all China League team with Michael Beasley on there. There are a couple other guys there that were too old to be there. And he essentially held his own. That was the day that I realized, okay, cool, this kid can play. I do think that his skill set is going to be very, very rare, because you talk about guys that can get their own shot. It's LaMelo, and it's Bouknight, and maybe Terry Rozier. Actually, no, and I'll throw Gordon Hayward in there too. Like, those are the four guys that you can feel comfortable maybe can get their own shot. And after that, it becomes a whole lot of guys that need to be spoon-fed, and he's good at that too. So I think he's the Halliburton of this class. I just wonder how much does the coaching system and how much does he take to everything? Because the sooner he takes everything, the more you're going to see him activated. And the more you see him activated, the more I think he's going to be really, really good for this team.
It's 2 Tyrese Halliburton mentions right now. My soul has been cut double time at this point. I'm sure some people, I do timestamp the podcast, so I don't think they could be too angry, but me waiting this long to ask about LaMelo Ball, one, I don't want to say plug this for you, but the podcast you and Walker did after the LaMelo Ball GQ article came out, that was also, I think that might be my favorite pod, one of my top 5 favorite Locked On Hornets pods. So
appreciate
people should
that.
go check that out. That was a great episode. But LaMelo Ball, what should we be looking to see from him in year 2? What are your expectations for him as he heads into that sophomore campaign?
Increased outside shot. I think the pre-LaMelo Ball, pre-wrist injury LaMelo Ball, the shooting, I think that's here to stay. I think it may even improve. I think we're going to get a better finishing inside the paint. LaMelo Ball. I think we're going to see a guy that's completely comfortable with the offense and has fully mastered the offense. That's the kind of guy that we're talking about. We're talking about a guy that, for the most part, has stayed in Charlotte, which should tell you some things. Not many guys, like, it's Terry that stays in Charlotte. It's Miles on occasion. But LaMelo's basically been in Charlotte the entire summer. That should kind of inform you on how these things are going to go. I really think that he may be the one Hornets second-year guy in the Borrego era that they're going to throw everything on, and I think he's going to live up to it more. Like, and for me, and you've listened enough to the pods to know, that's fairly high praise for this guy, because normally they don't live up to the second year hype. This kid could probably do it. And you know what? I'm okay with, like, I'm excited to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. Could I see him averaging 20, 22, and like, could I see him averaging 22 and 8 on like literally 40, 40, and again, 40, 40, 80? Yeah, I can. And if he does that, we're talking about possibly a playoff team. Not like playing game, no, playoff team, like top 6 team. He does that, and I think they're going to be in a really, really good spot in terms of the East.
I guess the two things, were you pleasantly surprised with his shooting off the dribble last year, even though there's room to grow? Like, I looked, he hit over 32% of his off the dribble threes, and I was just like, you know what, year one, for what people expected of him, that's fine. I was also more impressed that he did down a pretty good number of his catch and shoot looks as well. I think my bigger concern with him, just from a scoring perspective, I mean, when you watch LaMelo, you throw the end of the play or whatever his actual numbers are out of the equation, he is transcendent when he is on the court. Like, they have a transcendent building block, and that is the hardest aspect of any rebuild, retool, whatever, general managers or team presidents want to call it these days. That's the hardest person to find. They have found him. And so now it's about, like, what does he even have a ceiling? But I think what I don't even want to use the word concerned, because he actually took more shots at the rim than I expected him to, but his finishing was a little wonky. Do you see that being something?
I think the increased strength, I think he's going to increase strength. I think that's going to fix itself. I think that's a weight training program I think it's going to improve. I don't think it's going to be functionally there. I think it's going to improve to the point where we're not going to think about it nearly as much. That's the only thing that, like, I was concerned about was his finishing. But the jump shot, like, I was never one of those. I think we talked about this last year too. I was never one of those that was worried about the jump shot because I thought he could get to the rim at any time, at any point he wanted to. I think that increases this year because of the increased strength. I do wonder, like, the only thing I wonder is, does that increased strength mess with his jumper? That's the only thing I worry about. And if it does, cool. Then that 40-40, 40-40-80 doesn't happen. But I think we're going to see a better finishing at the rim LaMelo Ball. And I think a lot of that's going to change what we do, what we see with the Hornets, because he becomes the primary guy on offense. And maybe Gordon Hayward takes a slide down. And if that happens, this team is going to be really, really good.
This question probably ties into, I don't know if we need to curtail expectations for LaMelo Ball, but I will not overreact if he has a lateral season or if he doesn't improve by as much as people expect. I still see, and I should mention it's probably just among fans, the Hornets being listed as this playoff hopeful and, being interchangeable with some of the teams in the East. If LaMelo stays healthy, if Gordon Hayward stays healthy, should that really be the expectation, though? That just feels like, okay, good.
No. Like, this team feels like they're a year away from being really competitive. They feel like a year, like last year, and they'll admit this to you. They've admitted it publicly. This team was ahead of schedule. A good 65% of that was because of the emergence of LaMelo Ball. The other part was obviously the improvement of Miles Bridges, the Terry Rozier basically becoming a flamethrower. Like, there were parts that they just caught the league by surprise. They're not catching the league by surprise this year. Everybody knows how to go at them and be prepared. This is no longer the load management game on the schedule on the road trip. That matters. They're going to get everybody's best shot because of LaMelo Ball and the Wonder Kid. I can see a scenario where they win 35, 36, 37 games and be a better team and just lose because they're still trying to figure it out. I don't call them a play and hope. Like, the best case scenario is they're 6. And I mean, everything has to go right. We're talking Gordon Hayward plays 70 games, which I don't see happening.
Woo!
Exactly. Gordon Hayward plays 70 games. We're talking about Terry Rozier staying healthy. We're talking about Bouknight being Rookie of the Year. Like, that's the best case scenario. And even then, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. There's a chance that they finish 10 in the East and it's a successful season. Because why? Because this team got better and they're still younger and they're still trying to figure this out. This team is a year away from making noise consistently in the East, and I'm okay with that because there's a lot of these moving parts are still very, very young.
And I think that's important to remember, that growth is not formulaic. You can't just be measured in wins and losses because the East is different. And it's the same thing. It's a different version of this, but like it's with the Knicks. I think they could show real progress this year, be a better team long term, and they're just going to be substantially worse in the Eastern Conference standings. If LaMelo Ball comes along, if you get great reps from James Bouknight, if it looks like Miles Bridges has real staying power for you as someone that you want to pay or you've already paid, and that contract looks like a bargain after the fact, that's great for them because they have they'll have their first round pick still. It won't go to the Knicks in that case. And then you get a chance to add maybe another potential long-term building block. And you're just dealing with, I think what's most important to me from an outsider is just get more information about the younger, longer term part of this core together to see what it can be, to get a feel for it. And I also think that's why, regardless of how I feel about Mason Plumlee, although, by the way, the fact that he had to be a salary dump, like his like they got JT Thor to take on Mason Plumlee. And so that does change the calculus of getting Mason Plumlee for sure. I didn't think that was a contract Detroit would have to include a buffer for, but I digress there. So like that's almost why I'm okay. Well, not almost. I am okay with them not spending big on a center, even if I don't necessarily love Mason Plumlee's fit, because they're not ready to just shoot up the Eastern Conference. And so I'm happy that you said that, because I think that some people, because of how good LaMelo is and also how cool of a personality he is, that people are just going to expect like they need to make this leap in the standings next year. And I don't think that's the case.
Not like if they had one more guy, I would be like, yeah, okay, it's time to make the playoffs. For me, like this year is gravy. Like last year, I know you saw me say it to a whole bunch of Hornets fans, just enjoy the ride. They're not supposed to be here. They're not supposed to be this good. This year, there are going to be expectations, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all, Dan. Because you know what? The best part about doing this job sometimes is that you're a small market team that bubbles up, and you're not expected to. And again, you're in the VIP section when you're not supposed to be. You don't have the wristband that says VIP, the second and third. You're basically enjoying VIP for free. And that's cool. But at the same time, like now you're in VIP and you're actually paying for it. That's what this is now. Now people are paying for the VIP access and everything else like that. And now they're expecting to be wowed, and then they're gonna realize it's just VIP. It doesn't really matter because they're not getting past that velvet rope to the next thing. So
fantastic analogy, by the way.
For me, like this team has, I have no expectations for this team because I'll continue to reference this for the pod, but that December schedule, if you think they're going to do anything, they have to get through basically the first 2 months of this schedule and be 500. And I've made this joke before, and I'll continue to make this joke. If the Hornets are 500 or above by New Year's Day, just give Borrego that Coach of the Year award now, because it's a brutal stretch. And it doesn't get any easier because teams are going to be as competitive as they've ever been because there's no money in tanking this year. You have to justify people coming to your arena, and you have to do it in a pandemic, basically. So you're going to have to be exciting as possible. There's not going to be that blatant tanking that we've seen before because owners are broke. Or not broke.
Yeah.
They need the money. So they're going to field competitive teams. So there's not going to be those easy nights that you normally get. Those back of the schedule nights, those aren't necessarily going to be there either. Like the back half of the schedule where people give up, I'm not sure you're going to see that as much this year because owners need to justify people coming to the arena, and it's going to be a harder sell if you're blatantly tanking this year. So, I think this is one of those years where everybody's super competitive. The like from 6 to 12 is separated, especially in the East and West, where both conferences are ridiculously deep this year. Like 6 through 12 are separated by maybe 3 games. Like this is going to be a super, super competitive playoff run this year. And the Hornets may get caught in that wash because they're super, super, super young.
Yeah, and look, you're right to say that, especially in the East, because depending on how you feel about teams like the Wizards, the Pacers, the Bulls, the Raptors, assuming those teams don't turn into
The Raptors
sellers.
scare me, by the way.
I am troubled by how high I am on the Raptors, even though I have like no idea necessarily what they're doing. But depending on how you feel about sort of those teams, and including Charlotte, there's a chance that like they're only like it's 6 through 12, like you said. That could be just actually, you know what? It could be even more than that, because I'm not even convinced that after Brooklyn and Milwaukee, maybe it's Miami, maybe it's Atlanta.
Miami feels like fool's gold.
What'd you say, Atlanta?
Miami feels like fool's gold. Miami feels like fool's gold. Like they feel like a team that they are the old, like they're the guy that's like, we're gonna do. They're the C student. That's what they are. It's possible that they're like they could get A's if they really, really tried, but they're not. They know what the mission is. They're gonna do just enough. They're gonna enjoy just enough. There's enough there that they're going to load management. They're going to load manage a lot. They're going to preserve Jimmy. They're going to preserve Lowry. And it's going to be the Bam, Hero, and Adebayo show for a lot of this season. And then once it gets to the back half of the schedule and it's time to get it ramped up and get it going, they'll be 6, but they're going to take their time getting there. So I like, they're not going to be they're one of those teams I could see getting caught in the wash. I can easily see them getting caught in the wash with an injury or two, but they feel like fool's gold. Like we're putting them top 4, and I'm not sure they're really that good.
Yeah, and so and also their offense could wind up being a slog. Their 2 best players like don't shoot threes, and I do think that's a problem, especially when PJ Tucker is not high volume. They just don't have a ton of raw offensive talent on that team. But this is to my point. Is that it could be there will probably be a third team that distinguishes themselves below Milwaukee and Brooklyn. I don't know if you get to 4 or 5 there. And so there's a chance that we're talking about like 5 through 12 in the East is just like separated by a matter of games. For Charlotte, though, what is the weakness of this roster that concerns you the most? I have a feeling we've already discussed it, but just to lay it out, bald face.
It's the center position. I think Mason Plumlee's good. If Mason Plumlee gets hurt, you're talking about probably Vernon Carey starting. That's a problem.
Wow.
That is a massive.
A great way to frame it.
like that's where we're at with this. Like that is a massive problem. You are a Mason Plumlee injury away from major minutes for Vernon Carey. And Kai Jones, who I don't think is ready for center position minutes yet. Like that's where we're at with this. It's the center position. I do see like the one name we haven't brought up, and I wanted to bring him up a little bit, was Jalen McDaniels. And I think he's very, very useful. I think he's been underrated a little bit. I think he's a great 3-and-D stretch, again, 3-and-D wing. Just I wish he put any sort of muscle on him to put like literally he would work as a center if he was just a little bit stronger, but physically he just does not have the frame to put the weight on to be a center. And like it's just the defensive like the center position. I thought it was going to be bad enough to where they were going to theoretically bring Bismack Biyombo back. I still think there's a possibility of that. And I'm one of those, as you know, that is not nearly as negative on Biz as others. I want this to work. I'm not sure it's going to work, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Bismack Biyombo in the Charlotte Hornets uniform this year. That should tell you how worried I am about this position.
Do you think, and this is, so I'm getting in, this is just going to dovetail with the next question. Or I will say, so about Jalen McDaniels, I was surprised last year based off how strong he isn't. And even through his first 2 years in the league, he's just a better finisher at the rim than I expected when you look at him. So there's that in addition to him hitting a pretty good clip of his threes last year. But so the center position, is this something you could try to see them dressing via trade, or do you just think that they punt on it until ideally next offseason when they have a better idea of what this team is? And overall, who is the player as of this day? Because a lot of things can change as we go through the season. You've all people know that. But who's the player right now who you would bill as most likely to be traded before the deadline?
Before he signed his extension, I would have said it was Terry. Now that he signed his extension, if this team falls on its face, and they could easily do it at the beginning of the part of the season, if this team falls on its face, part of me says it's Oubre because of that partially guaranteed contract.
Right.
I think it's Oubre for right now. Small second, and things have to go completely south, and he may just need a change of scenery. It might be PJ. I think the only way but I also think the only way PJ is done in this town is if Miles Turner becomes available, because we know that they've been, like, the Hornets and the Pacers have been flirting with one another, and it's been
it feels like 2 to 3 years at this point.
Yeah, at this point, yeah. Like, it feels like the Miles Turner deal is coming at some point. PJ Washington is probably the guy that helps grease the skis for that. I think, like, if you're telling me the two guys, again, the guys that are most likely to be traded, probably Oubre and PJ Washington, but I also don't see them. The only other way I also see them trading is if they're better than I think. Like, they're either better than they expected or far, far worse, and one of the young kids explodes onto the scene and basically makes it so that he's not necessary, that one of those guys is no longer necessary. So, yeah, it's those two guys, but I don't feel confident that they're making a trade this offseason, during an in-season trade this year.
And for them, I think you could argue that it would almost be better if Turner didn't become available, because that kind of then forces them to make a decision. If they are worse than expected, that's a tough call to make all of a sudden, to give up assets on a win-now player when you're not set up for that. I would be curious. I don't know if they would want him with his new deal coming up, but would you give up Miles Bridges in a Miles Turner trade?
No. Like, because I don't. Miles Bridges, at worst, is your second best defender. Cody Martin's your best one right now. That should tell you where you are defensively, where this team is defensively. Exactly. That should tell you where you are. I honestly am at the point where if you trade one of those two, if you trade a Miles Bridges, you are telling me that you were scared of clutch. You are scared of Clutch Sports, which, mind you, doesn't help you, because do you want to know who also is a Clutch Sports client on that team? That would be Kai Jones. What happens if he explodes? So I don't think, and also I think Miles matters too much. If we're talking about locker room leadership, there are two guys that you obviously go to. Terry Rozier is the first. Miles Bridges is the second. Like, this team runs off the heartbeat of those two guys. They're the ones that set up the infamous Miami trip where they're down there. They were down there. They got everybody. Like, Terry organized it. Miles, again, him and Miles shot a rap video over the weekend, over one of those weeks in Miami doing it. But I think Miles Bridges matters too much, because when you can get the coaching staff, when you can get Michael friggin' Jordan down there to Miami to watch a practice, that should tell you about the impact and the leadership that Miles Bridges brings to the team. I don't think they're trading that just that, like, loosely for Miles Turner, for a guy that is a win, like you said, a win now move. It doesn't make sense.
I'm with you. I would rather give up PJ Washington, filler, and then stuff. I don't know what that stuff is. It's not James Bouknight for me.
Jalen McDaniels right there.
Well, I'm thinking, and it's probably tough given the protection, but I'm assuming Indiana's going to want some future draft equity, is my bet in that
Yeah,
deal.
yeah. But I also like the thing with a Miles Turner deal, and this is the thing, like you got to do something with one of those guys, whether it's Sabonis or it's Turner. Like they got to do something, and I think you're gonna like it's almost similar to a Ben Simmons situation. It's similar, but not like in the same avenue. Like you're gonna take pennies on the dollar for what you're trading them for pennies on one of those guys for pennies on the dollar. Unfortunately, it's just a matter of which one.
What do you think this team's go-to crunch lineup will be, should be, however you want to answer that question?
LaMelo, Terry, Miles, PJ, Gordon. I think that's it right there. I don't think anybody I don't think anyone cracks that. And the only reason or if anyone really, really cracks it, it's because Gordon's hurt. That's it. Like those are your 5 best players in your 5 best positions. You're going to get killed on the glass, but you're going to score a lot. And it's literally a 5-out team at that point, where Gordon does what he does best and get to the mid-range and nail an uncanny amount of mid-range jumpers.
Yeah, I don't even think that there's another answer there. Like I'm just thinking about like I don't know why you would want like maybe against a certain team why you want Plumlee to close. I don't see it.
Plumlee. The only way I can see Plumlee, like PJ's got to be really in the doghouse, and we've seen Borrego call PJ out for being out of shape last year. PJ's got to be in the doghouse for that to happen, and even then, I like Plumlee. PJ's a better shooter, and if you're gonna want to do 5 out and open the floor as much as possible with the threat of the 3, you're gonna need PJ in that lineup.
Yeah, and I also just like PJ Washington. Like, obviously I think Mason Plumlee's making more complex decisions with the ball. PJ Washington is so quick with his decisions, and I love that. What is, and this is my favorite question to ask guests during these look aheads. I don't know if they're as into it as I am, but if you were the coach, what is just a quirky, offbeat, random lineup that you would insist on rolling out just to try it to see what happens?
Let's see. Ish Smith, who I think is going to be a solid backup for this team. Ish, Bouknight, McDaniels, Miles, PJ.
Okay, I'm with it.
I think that's going to be a fun lineup that allows allows your 3 main guys to rest. On top of which is sneaky dunk on you good. Like that is one of those. I'm going to roll this out on 2K and see how it goes, and I'm going to have fun. And I'm gonna outscore you and dunk on you, and you're gonna throw the controller. That's the type of lineup that is.
I think it's good that the Hornets fans were watching Devontae Graham for a few seasons, so that they'll be used to a point guard who can't shoot at the rim in Ish Smith. It's good that you guys have been prepped for that. I think my lineup would be LaMelo, Rozier, Bouknight, PJ Washington, and Miles Bridges. That might even be too realistic for this exercise, but
that is entirely too realistic. I can see that lineup in like MLK Day. I can see that lineup.
All right. Well, I'm going to stick with it because I really want to see it. But yeah. So final question here is, as of this recording, their win total over under is set at 37.5. Would you take the over or under? And where do you see them stacking up in the East? We already kind of got into that part a little bit.
I'm under, but I'm slightly under. I think, and again, I will continue to beat this into the ground. I think that, hold on, let me go look at this right quick while we're doing this, because I want people to understand exactly what I mean when I say the schedule in December is brutal, because it's one of those things that is super ugly in December. Okay, so this is why I say the under. This is their December schedule before Christmas, Dan.
Oh, boy.
At the Bucks, December 1st. At the Hawks, December 5th. Home for the Sixers, December 6th. Another home date against the Sixers, which, mind you, Embiid has killed this team because there's no real center. The Kings game is the one of those few respites. Then you have Luka, again, going to Dallas to play Luka, who after the first time LaMelo and them beat them, has taken it personally now. The Spurs game, Blazers, Suns, Jazz, Nuggets. That's all before Christmas, Dan. How good are
I'm
you feeling
exhausted
about
listening to it.
that? like, you see what I'm saying, though? That's the stretch that I think kills any chance of over 37.5. Like, I don't see the easy pockets of games where you think they're going to win or they're going to steal them. And I don't see them as the load management team as we've gone over before. This is a team that is going to be on the radar of everybody. And I don't know that this team can survive that while still trying to figure out the center position. And they're still trying to figure out who belongs and who doesn't at this point. There's a lot of this that still needs to be figured out. And I don't think figuring it out on the fly gets you more than 35, 36 wins, even with LaMelo.
And you have to figure, how many wins did they give up by letting Grant Riller go?
Not now.
Is there? I would go under as well, just because. I'm not just because, but one of the reasons was it's the over-unders in the East are tough, and I don't think that it's about this year specifically for the Hornets. And so, as you mentioned, they're not going to tank, but I could see them maybe in the middle of the season focus more on, are we going to get Kai Jones real reps? What does James Bouknight look like? And there's also the prospect of a Gordon Hayward injury. What if Miles Bridges isn't as good? And what if the center position is just a disaster? What if everything else is the same as last season, but the center position is somehow worse off?
Well, to be fair, I was about to say the center position was a disaster last
year. But you don't have Bismack Biyombo now, so it could technically be a little bit worse.
Oh, no, you act like they can't sign him. They can sign him.
It's a race between them and Milwaukee. They'll be fighting over Bismack.
Even still, like, this team feels like like they're going to compete for 8, 9, 10. And that's if you're the Hornets, your goal is get at least one home game. Again, get one home game to play in. I think if they get that, it's a successful season. But I think you can get that. For some reason, I think because everybody is going to be super competitive this year, I can see 37 wins being a 7th seed. Like, I can see 37 wins on the nose being the 7th seed this year. Mm-hmm. And literally, they're just being that third. Because if you're thinking about it, the tiers, like we've talked about already, Brooklyn and Milwaukee are in a tier by themselves. I think Atlanta's 3.
I'm with you.
Philly is probably 4, but I don't feel good about it.
You want to know who's my 4 right now? I think you can guess. Toronto.
Man, I can't put I can't.
They feel like a regular season team. They would get their offense. I feel like would get slaughtered in the playoffs. They feel like a very good regular season team based on what looks like how they're going to be able to defend. That's where I stand.
I don't see them as 4. I see them in that other tier with Miami, actually. Like Miami, Toronto, Indiana, Boston, who I don't think any of that was a fluke. And I don't think they've exercised any of those demons. Like, I think, like, I would have had Indiana as 4 had TJ Warren not continued to be out. I would think I would have had Indiana as 4 because I think Carlisle is about to do some magic up there. I do. If you had gun to my head, I probably you know what? Gun to my head, I think it's Boston. I think Boston has a snapback, but I think that, like you said, they feel like a regular season team. So that 5, 6, 7, 8, it couldn't be like Chicago, the Knicks, the Heat. And I think the Hornets are in that 4th tier that's going to be scraping and hopefully catches one of them sleeping for one of those 7 or 8 spots and hopefully gets at least one home game to get into the playoffs. And I think that's the goal for them. I think if they're there, I think 37 wins can get them to at least that. though. But that should be the goal.
I guess what would be interesting about this team is because they have LaMelo, the overreaction train is ready to go. So if they're actually better than expected, by let's say they go into Christmas or let's say they eke out of December and they're like 500 or better than 500, people are going to be off the wall so high on the Hornets. And I'm here for the Hornets to enter that type of mainstream overreaction conversations. I root, as someone who covers the league at large, for good stories, but also chaos. Yeah. And so I need the Hornets to be better than expected. That's what needs to happen.
Here's the thing. I don't need that. I don't need that stress because I'm going to be the one calming everybody down. Like, hey, Gordon Hayward hasn't taken his injury sabbatical yet, guys. Let's hold off. Let's wait to see what this team is without him and everything else like that. This team, like, they feel like a year away from being on that rocket ship. I want them to be good this year. Them being good made it easy to record a daily podcast. But at the same time, this team feels like we've talked about, the growth necessarily isn't linear to this. So if they do one of those things where they're a little bit worse, I'm kind of okay with that. Like, they're going to be a little bit worse. They're going to be one of those teams that just ekes out like 9th place. They finished 9th again. Like, I could see them doing that and people considering it a disappointment. And I'm going to be the one screaming at everybody like, have you seen that this team has gotten younger and yet somehow done the same thing? They're in a good spot for where they're supposed to be. But for right now, I think just, again, even if they miss the playoffs altogether, this is not necessarily a bad season. Next year is going to be the expectations. And next year is when you're supposed to be paying to be in VIP. And Lord knows, everybody hates to pay to be in VIP.
Is there anyone or anything about this team I didn't ask you that you think needs to be covered?
Jalen, I'm going to continue to say his name because I think when we he might be the third guy. He might be number 3 on the list of guys that don't necessarily, that don't get enough pub, and he ends up being the third guy on that most likely to be traded list. I think Jalen McDaniels is playing for money, similar to Miles Bridges. I think a lot of this will dictate, I think a lot of his play will dictate where he goes, because right now he does not fit on this team. I do kind of wonder where his spot is, and if he's going to be one of those guys that's a fill-in or a throw-in on a trade. I think he's going to be really, really good. I think he's going to end up being in somebody's top 7. I don't think it's in Charlotte. And for right now, him, Cody Martin, they're rotation guys for a title team. It's just they're the back end, and those guys become valuable or decent throw-in pieces to get additional picks. So I do wonder what happens with the back half of this roster, and if we're going to see a continual churn, because I can see that happening and solidifying that top 7, top 8 to where you're like, okay, we know all these roster guys and all this roster. We'll figure out the roster by the end of this season at this point.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Jalen McDaniels brings his 3-point clip back up to where it was during his rookie year, when he only shot, I think it was under 25 threes total. But if that comes up from the 33.3% of last season, which is not rock bottom, 33.3%, but if that comes up, he becomes very intriguing for teams that are looking for like that wing, like bigger wing depth, with guys who can play maybe wings and the big spots. Kanata, this was great as always. Are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you and your work?
Absolutely. You can hear me starting on Monday, 5 days a week. Again, here myself, Walker Mail. We do Locked On Hornets. We try to keep it informal. We try to keep it fun. We literally jacked, and on occasion we steal concepts for our podcast. We try to keep it fun. So just Friday, we ended up stealing PTI's concept, and then Monday, we'll probably come up with some other kind of concept. But you can find myself at Locked On Hornets or at Nada the Scribe. I will be screaming and live tweeting about Hornets games and filling your timeline with nothing but annoying Hornets anecdotes for the next 6 months. Again, I promise it's not as brutal as I'm sounding. It's more fun than you think. We try to turn it into a party.
It's fun. It's a great podcast. You're a fantastic follow, so I highly endorse following Nata the Scribe, NATATHESCRIBE. This was fantastic as always. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. And as you know by now, you can rest assured I'll be pestering you again in the future. But in what is a new theme, I will not be trolling you this season because I don't think karmically I have the bandwidth to do that anymore.
You can't help yourself, Dan.
No, I'm going to resist. You
can't help yourself. I thank you for Kai Jones. Like, karmically, I thank you for Kai Jones. I thank you for James Bouknight. And then I thank you for, again, the whole Obi Toppin thing. Because
that one hurts more than the Kai Jones thing. I'm not going to lie.
It should hurt you because you passed on Tyrese Halliburton for it. Your team passed on Tyrese Halliburton for Obi Toppin, and who, mind you, we both had that discussion of, oh dear Lord, I hope he doesn't end up on one of our teams. And guess where he ended up? Guess where he ended up, Dan?
Yeah, and I was so relentless with you for it too, trolling you right up into the draft. So that was just I will not be doing it this season. I will try to resist. But Nata, thank you so much. I will be talking to you soon.
Dude, kid, I love doing this. Talk to you soon, Mike.
Sign up for WynnBET Sportsbook at WYNNBet.com today using promo code BLUEWIRE to get up to $1,000 toward a risk-free sports bet. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WynnBET.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WynnBET is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.